Hello, my name is Jam, and welcome to another Bishoujo action figure review. Today we'll be looking at a new figure named Camio from a line called Solomon 72 Gaiden, made by the Chinese manufacturer Orange Cat Industry, under their BODYTEC line. Orange Cat Industry seems to specialize in plastic model kits, and this appears to be their first pre-assembled action figure. The character was designed by Mojarin and is sculpted by Ryuntaro, also known as RyunRyun Tei, who is also the creator of the Solomon 72 Gaiden IP. This figure just released in July of 2022 at a list price of 7,150 yen, but importers seem to be selling her from around $75 to $100. Camio is part of RyunRyun Tei's Solomon 72 Gaiden line of Bishoujo demons, but I believe she is the first one released as a pre-assembled complete action figure. The prior figures in the series came as a kit that you had to assemble. It's all based on a grimoire published in 1641 called The Lesser Key of Solomon. The demon Camio is the 53rd demon of the 72 demons of Solomon and is said to appear in the form of a bird, which explains the feathery trim of some of this figure's outfit. Camio can also take the form of a man carrying a sword, so of course this Bishoujo version has a sword as well. Apparently you summon Camio from burning ashes or the coals of a fire, which probably inspired this figure's blazing red chi pao and red-hot sword tip. I honestly didn't know this figure was based on a quote-unquote real demon when I pre-ordered her, but researching Camio has been interesting and a bit creepy, as I've never really dived this deep into the occult. The box for Camio is pretty nice and fits in well with other high-end action figures such as Figma's and Mafex. A prominent window shows off the contents of the box, along with a nice photo of the figure. The left side just features Camio's name, while the right side shows beautiful artwork of Camio by Mojarin. The bottom and top of the box are pretty much the same, featuring a photo of Camio brandishing her sword, while the back has a multitude of photos showing off her different looks and facial expressions. Opening the box, the figure and accessories are stored in a single covered tray. The stand, instructions, and first run illustration are packaged under the tray, and if you've seen my other reviews, then you'll know that I hate accessories taped to the bottom of the tray. I also hate it when the tray lid is taped when it doesn't need to be. Such is the case here, and it's annoyingly taped on all sides. It's completely unnecessary, as the lid snaps firmly in place and holds the figure and accessories quite well on its own without needing tape. In fact, you need to be careful not to lose anything, since many of the accessories will go flying around just from the force of unsnapping the lid. That's how secure it is. So, great looking box, but it really needs less or no tape on the inner tray. Sculpt work is really impressive. I was immediately struck by how strong and crisp the details were on this figure once I took her out of the tray. The head sculpt is phenomenal, and I really like how her hair was sculpted to drape around her sharply sculpted horns. The strands of hair at the sides that curl up are also a nice touch, and help give her some added character. The face sculpts look amazing as well, and matches up with the 2D artwork by Mojarin. I love her somewhat chubby cheeks, and the slight smile on her normal face is really cute. The smiling and angry faces have open mouths, and it appears that her teeth and tongue are actually separate sculpts that were inserted from the back, and I have to say, her teeth really do look nice because of it. It would have been interesting if this were an actual feature, where you could switch out the teeth and tongue for a full toothy grin or something like that. It's a cool idea for customizing in any case. Camio's body is quite curvy, and if you're into thick thighs and hips, then this figure will be right up your alley, as it's one of her defining features. The transition from hips to thighs is slightly jarring due to the articulation, but it still works in my opinion. She does look a little flat and two-dimensional when viewed from the side though, and I think it would have been nice if her curviness were more apparent from this view. Her chest is moderately sized, and I like how it was integrated with the articulation, though gaps can start to appear when you get to the extremes. Her sculpted and revealing chi pao looks nice and smooth with some slight wrinkles at the waist, a good balance of detail and slickness to convey a silky material which most chi paos are made of. Even though her outfit is separated due to the articulation, it still looks good the majority of the time. The lower part of the jipao is flexible so it doesn't hinder the articulation, but there's still a bit of stiffness to the material. There are plenty of nice little details, such as the green ropes at her waist and right thigh, or the tassels at her hips that match the ones in her hair. Camio has a number of optional outfit parts. She has these blue feather trim details at her neck and biceps, and these can be removed easily by taking off the head for the neck feathers, and then you pull the arm off at the bicep and replace those feathers with a golden armlet. Next, her forearm armor can be removed as well as her hand armor. For these, you simply remove her hands along with her wrist joints, and they can slip right off. With all of these optional parts removed, Camio feels more casual, and it's also nice that she's a bit more posable since those parts will no longer restrict motion as much. So how is her articulation? First, let's do a quick rundown of all her articulation points. Starting from the top, her head is attached to the neck with a standard ball joint. Nothing fancy here, but there is a good range of motion that's really only hindered by the feathers around her neck or her hair. It would have been nice to see articulation at the base of her neck, but it's still fine without it. Her shoulders are similar to Figma shoulder joints, where they connect to the torso with a ball joint and then there's a hinge for the actual shoulder. As you can see, her shoulder is just a piece that slips over the joint. This peg then becomes the bicep swivel. The elbow joint is a hinge that is pegged into the forearm and bicep, so there's also some swivel room above and below the elbow. Unfortunately, this does become an issue, which I'll get into later. The range of motion at the elbow depends on if you have the forearm armor and feathers on her or not. With the forearm armor and feathers on, the elbows can only bend to about 90 degrees, and removing them allows the elbows to bend well past 90 degrees. Moving on, the wrist joints are hinged and peg into the forearm and hand, allowing you to swivel above and below the wrist. Like the elbows, the range of motion depends on whether her hand armor is on or off. The torso has a ball-jointed upper torso, and it's on a barbell joint, which allows for some play and added range of motion. The hips are ball-jointed and have a great range of motion, but it's restricted by the tassels on her hips. There does seem to be this Y-shaped joint here, which should theoretically allow for an even wider range of motion, but her underwear and the size of her hips don't really allow much extra movement. There is a simple swivel point at the thigh, which is well hidden on her right leg, but is more obvious on her left, especially when you twist it. The knees are double jointed and are pegged into the thighs and calves, so the legs can bend quite far and can also swivel a bit above and below the knee. The ankle joints are hinged and peg into the calves and feet, allowing for rotation and ankle tilts. All in all, that's a great set of articulation points, but there are some issues. First, I feel like the tension at the bicep joint is a little too high, and that's a problem when the tension for the elbow joint is looser, like it is on this figure. My first instinct is to swivel the arm by holding the forearm, but because of the lesser tension at the elbow, I end up pulling her entire forearm off instead. So it's not a huge issue, but it does make posing a little more difficult. Second, while the hip joints are fine, you do need to be careful and try not to stress the tassels at her hips too much. In my range of motion tests, I accidentally broke off one of the tassels, and so it looks like I'll have to glue that back on. I wish they were made of softer material or were made to swivel out of the way. Lastly, I feel like the tension on the joints are very inconsistent overall. I already mentioned how the elbow swivels are looser than the bicep swivel, and the same looseness is also present at the knees of my figure, particularly the right knee. If BODYTEC can be more consistent with the tension in the joints, it will feel like a higher quality figure. In terms of accessories, Camio comes with a lot of optional parts, but her main accessory is her long sword. It looks like a jian, which is a Chinese double-edged sword. The hilt has a nice design for a handguard, and the end has an emerald-colored jewel. Unfortunately, my sword came out of the box a bit slanted. I thought it might be broken, so I just pulled on the blade and it came out pretty easy. I'm not sure if this peg is supposed to be longer, but in any case, my blade is a bit loose and won't stay straight in the hilt. I'll have to glue it to keep it straight. I already talked about the alternate expressions a bit earlier, but let's take a look at how you change them. It's very similar to Figma's in that you need to remove the front part of her hair and then switch out the face with another one. It's pretty standard practice nowadays, and there's no real issues here. Next, let's look at her extra hands. She comes out of the box with her closed fists, but she also comes with 3 extra pairs of hands. You have a pair in a V or peace sign, a pair of open hands, and a pair of hands for holding her sword. They're all well sculpted, and a section of her pinstriped arm sleeves continue onto them, and you can see that they are held on by a ring that goes around her middle finger. The hands attach to the wrist joints via pegs in a similar fashion to Figma's. You also get gold armlets for when you want to display Camio without her arm feathers. They're pretty small, so be sure not to lose them, especially when you unsnap the lid to the storage tray, as they will probably pop out of place. You also get a display stand in clear plastic. It has a round base and an articulated arm pegs into it. A peg at the end of the arm attaches to the lower back of Camio. It's pretty similar to Figma stands, and that's a good thing in my opinion. One slightly strange thing is the peg that attaches to Camio has a larger tip, which makes it a little difficult when inserting it, but I guess it feels more secure once it's in. Then we have an instruction sheet that's in multiple languages, and this first production run of the figure comes with an illustration by Mojarin, the character designer of Camio. The image measures just shy of 6 inches by 6 inches, and is printed on a nice cardstock with a metallic sheen to it. It comes in a dark red envelope with the Solomon 72 logo on the front in gold foil, giving it a luxury feel. Like the sculpt work, the paint job on Camio is impressive. Everything is pretty crisp and clean, and I love the gradients in her horns and hair. The gold elements of her outfit and accessories have a nice metallic look, and certain parts are painted darker to bring out the details. The metallic silver of her sword is also very smooth and consistent, and I love that red gradient at the end, which matches Camio's metallic red chipao. I think the only real flub on my figure is this spot of red paint on the light blue trim of her chipao, and I'm going to assume it's not like this on every figure. Her gray legging and arm sleeves have very clean green pinstripes on them, and they line up really well where they are broken up from the articulation. Lastly, Camio's skin has some subtle shading here and there, which really helps keep her skin from looking too plasticky. Oh, I almost forgot to mention that I think they should have packaged the forearm armor separately, or at least put some protective plastic between the armor and her arms, because some of the gold paint transferred to my figure's right arm. Finally, let's talk about compatibility with other figures. Camio measures 6 inches or 15 centimeters from her feet to the top of her head, so she's bigger than most Figmas, but can fit in depending on which ones you have, since their scales can vary. For instance, you could argue that the Demon Slayer Figmas scale well with her, since they seem to be scaled larger than most Figmas, with the added bonus that Camio is a demon, so it actually works theme-wise. Other than that, Camio might fit in better with model kit figures like Sosai Shoujo Teien, Frame Arms Girls, or 6-inch action figures like Marvel Legends, or the Link's Pulse Cerberus figure. You might be wondering if you can swap heads with other figures, and most heads I've tried didn't work, either because the joint wasn't compatible or because the neck post is so long. However, the one head that did work amazingly well is the head from Link's Pulse's Cerberus. Cerberus also has a long neck post, and the ball joint size is close enough at around 5mm. Now the tension at the joint is pretty loose, but the head does stay on, and I think it looks rather good. Unfortunately, the reverse is not quite true. You can't put Camio's head on Cerberus's body, since the Cerberus ball joint is slightly bigger. You can modify the ball joint if you really want to make that happen, but I personally don't think it's worth it. I don't have any TB League figures, but if they are similar to Cerberus, then those heads should work on Camio's body as well. The wrist joints on Camio are very similar to Figma wrist joints, so I tried a few and I think your mileage may vary. For instance, Figma Kasumi's hand just felt way too tight to fit on the wrist joint, but Figma Ochako's hand went on easier. Figma stands are also compatible, and basically any stand that uses 3mm pegs will also work, though the hole on her back will get a little looser due to the aforementioned larger tip at the end of the included stand. So that about wraps up this review. Overall, I really like this figure. I was actually working on a different review when this came in, and Camio impressed me so much that I switched to working on this review. I was immediately struck by the appealing sculpt work, character design, and overall execution. I love how cute Camio's face looks, and they managed to capture Mojarin's style perfectly. It's a great effort by Orange Cat Industry for what appears to be their first action figure, and it looks like they'll be making another Camio figure as a regular human in a school uniform. There are a few quibbles like the inconsistent joint tension, breakable tassels at the hips, and the wobbly blade of my sword, but overall I'm still impressed with this figure and I love the look of it. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you for making it this far, and thank you to those of you who are subscribers. If you aren't a subscriber yet, please consider it as it helps me and the channel out. Let me know if you have this figure or are planning on getting it in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next review. Jam out.